All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for attending our Southwest Region Sportspersons Caucus for this year. I want to go ahead and introduce our region manager, Corey Chick. One of our caucus reps is here in person, Mia Anstein. Thanks for coming over. We got our deputy region manager, Heath Kem here. Our senior wildlife biologist, Jamie Grick here, and deputy region manager, Matt Thorpe as well. And in the back, we've also got our Durango area office wildlife manager, Adrian Archuleta. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Corey and Mia to go ahead and get the meeting rolling, and we'll start working through the agenda.
Well, I wanted to thank all of you that made it in person. For those of you online, we have a serious snowstorm right now in Durango. So thank you to the few that are here. I do hope that next summer our in-person meeting will happen again. I begged for this one, so I'm glad that a few of you are here. And they brought kind of a good round list of topics that they're gonna show. And if you guys have ideas in the future, if you'll reach out, I know a few of you have my contact, but just reach out and let me know if there's stuff that you want to hear about.
I'll echo what Mia said. I do appreciate y'all being here. It's nice to start having these in person and actually seeing folks face to face. Sorry for those that are online that you couldn't attend. I get it though. I just wanted to touch on a couple points. One, I want to thank the time that staff has spent on putting this together. We really couldn't do it without them. I think it's really a good collection of data and some of the hot topics that we're working on right now. Another one, and hopefully they attend, typically they do, but Commissioner Haskett and Blecka, and I'm sure when they jump on either way, thanks for their attendance, hopefully tonight and in the past. Legislative year, this has been a busy legislative year for CPW. There's a lot of bills out there. Too many to go through, to be honest. I would recommend you all get out there and look at the legislative agenda. I think there's 300 or more that have been introduced this year. And of course, not all related to CPW, but quite a few of those have been. Thanks to Mia and Roger for their attendance the last couple of years. Just a little bit of housekeeping at the end. What I'll recommend is, one, I've never seen such great attendance out of two caucus members. So one, I appreciate that. Two, their first terms are up. So as a group, we'll either need to extend those to a second term, or if there is others that would like to join, we can figure out a way to do that. But either way, I'd like to move forward with the caucus, and we'll do that again more towards the end. And the last thing is, I mean, this is a packed agenda. There also is a roundtable Q&A session in there to where, I mean, we're here for you to answer your questions if you have any, both online or in person. I think John will be looking at the online questions a little bit, and then we can just work through those here if y'all have any. We do have a 7:45 hard stop. This building does close at 8, so if we can make sure we hit that 7:45 time and get time for us to clean our stuff out of here. But, I see Roger Cesario has joined. He's our other Southwest Caucus member. Roger, if you can hear us, I'll throw it over to you if you have any good to the group. We can't hear you, Roger.
Soundbar's not on.
It's not muted. Yeah. Just one second, Roger.
Try to fix the problem.
John, this is Rachel. I could not hear Roger either online.
Okay, excellent. Roger, can you try again for us?
It's still muted, Roger.
We don't have you, Roger.
We'll try to,
Audio connection, he needs to switch it to a different speaker, you can tell because there's no white box around the other stuff.
Roger, I think it's on your side if you can figure that out. Okay, we'll jump back to you.
We'll jump back to you and we'll go ahead and keep rolling and then we'll come back to you.
All right, with that, we have our aquatic biologist out of Gunnison and Taylor, Dan Brock. Dan, if you want to take the floor and tell us about the Taylor and gold medal designation, we appreciate it.
Sounds great. Yeah, happy to be with you guys this evening, online at least, and I'll share my presentation here. So. Okay, hopefully that's working for everybody. Yeah, great to be with you. And plan to share a little bit about our gold medal program, which is a statewide program. Talk a little bit about the Gunnison and Taylor rivers, which are our newest two gold medal waters. And then talk a little bit about some other factors on those rivers, including water development, an exchange agreement associated with that development, and then some more recent habitat improvement work that we have completed. So the gold medal program was developed beginning in 1981 when a resolution was passed by the Wildlife Commission asking us to develop a quality trout program. And the program is really intended to designate waters that are available for trophy fishing opportunities and high angling success at waters that really have the best habitat quality in the state. So currently, or to meet the criteria for gold medal waters, the water has to have at least 60 pounds of trout per acre or biomass and a minimum number of quality sized fish over 14 inches of 12 fish per acre. Currently, we have 19 gold medal stream segments, including the most recent two on 13 streams and 3,206 acres of designated lakes at 3 waters. And so providing some information on the Gunnison and Taylor, I wanted to kind of start early on when the Gunnison was first noted as one of the best fisheries around. And this is a quote from the 1946 Colorado Conservation Comments, which if you're familiar with Colorado Outdoors, this is just the earlier version of that, and reported that the National Geographic Society at that time had rated the Gunnison River as the best trout fishery in the entire country. And interest really was developed early on the Gunnison, with access really improved beginning in 1881 when the railroad reached the Gunnison area. And by 1893, no less than 16 resorts or hotels were in place on the Gunnison River to provide places for anglers, hunters, and folks that were traveling on the rail line to stay in the Gunnison area. And it included many fishermen and women that came to the area, including these folks that fished the Gunnison early during that time. And at that time, we had primarily native cutthroat trout, as well as introduced rainbow trout and brown trout present in the Gunnison River. It also included a lot of people that traveled to the area to fish in the area of the Gunnison, currently inundated by Blue Mesa Reservoir, including these fishermen who were fishing near the Dillon Pinnacles. So shifting over to some of the water projects in the area, we have 2 major water projects, including the Colorado River project, which included the construction of 3 Gunnison reservoirs, as well as the Uncompahgre project, which included the Gunnison Tunnel and Taylor Park Reservoir. So the beginning of the Uncompahgre project started in the early 1900s with construction of the Gunnison Tunnel. This was the first project completed by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and when completed in 1909 was the longest irrigation tunnel in the world. This project delivers water from the Black Canyon of the Gunnison to the Uncompahgre Valley, diverting water out of the Gunnison Basin into the area that is located in the Montrose to Delta area, irrigating up to 76,000 acres. And this project did see shortages of water in the 1930s, and so a storage reservoir was developed upstream on the Taylor River, which is Taylor Park Reservoir, which was completed in 1937. So in the early years, Taylor Park Reservoir was managed primarily to provide irrigation water for the Uncompahgre project. So it delivered needed flows in the summer and fall time periods. And then flows were drastically reduced to maximize storage, with flows often near zero during the winter time period. Then in the spring, once the reservoir filled, it then spilled, often resulting in higher spring flows. And this really resulted in fairly low survival of trout in the Taylor River downstream of Taylor Park Reservoir. The Colorado River project began in 1962 with the construction of Blue Mesa Reservoir, and then included two additional reservoirs downstream, Morrow Point Reservoir and Crystal Reservoir. In total, these three reservoirs inundated 38 miles of the Gunnison River. They did, however, extend trout habitat downstream by releasing much cooler water during the summertime period, and resulted in establishment of one of our better gold medal waters in the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. Construction of the Aspinall Unit reservoirs that did provide opportunity for re-regulation of flows downstream of Taylor Park Reservoir and Blue Mesa Reservoir, and concerns about the Gunnison and Taylor River fisheries resulted in discussions by water users, fisheries managers, and governmental organizations. And in 1975, an exchange agreement was hammered out. This agreement allowed the Uncompahgre Valley water users to pull their water from Blue Mesa Reservoir instead of Taylor Park Reservoir. And this allowed the upper basin to manage those flows to optimize conditions for fisheries in the Gunnison and Taylor Rivers and in Taylor Park Reservoir. It also resulted in benefits to irrigation flows, boating flows, and reduced flooding concerns between Taylor Park Reservoir and Blue Mesa Reservoir. More recently, partnerships have come together to improve habitat on the Gunnison River. Beginning in 2017, work was done on the Gunnison River with funding provided by the Colorado Water Conservation Board, of the Lore Foundation, Trout Unlimited, the City of Gunnison, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. This work did significantly improve trout habitat through the Gunnison area reach, improving bank stabilization in areas that were degraded, and several irrigation diversions. So with this work, we really have seen great conditions on the Gunnison and Taylor Rivers overall that have allowed a quality trout fishery to flourish and resulted in our ability to designate the Gunnison and Taylor as gold medal waters. The gold medal reaches include 20 miles on the Taylor River downstream of Taylor Park Reservoir, including 11 miles of bank access. And it also includes 12.5 miles of stream on the Gunnison River with 4 miles of bank access. And all 4 miles of the bank access on the Gunnison is on land purchased by the Bureau of Reclamation in part for mitigation for inundation of stream miles with the Aspinall unit. Within this reach, we do have 7 boat ramps. These boat ramps provide access to about 20 miles of our gold medal water, including 7 miles on the lower Taylor and the entire 12.5 miles on the Gunnison. So I mentioned the minimum standards for gold medal, the standards being 60 pounds per acre of biomass and 12 or more fish over 14 inches per acre. And so I'll provide just a few slides that show our estimates for the Gunnison and Taylor rivers. First off, this slide shows Taylor River biomass for 3 sites that we sampled downstream of Taylor Park Reservoir. One near the town of Almont, one just near Spring Creek, the confluence of Spring Creek Reservoir, or I'm sorry, Spring Creek, and then the tailwater reach just below Taylor Park Reservoir. This does show our estimates of trout biomass for all species, and the red dashed line is our gold medal standard. And in 2021, at the tailwater reach, those numbers exceeded the standard by about 7 times. Shifting over to quality trout estimates, this slide shows estimates for those reaches on the Taylor River, as well as the standard. And within the tailwater reach, the standard was exceeded by 18 times, with the standard being met or exceeded all years in the last 10 or 12 years. So anglers have certainly grown accustomed to seeing quality sized trout downstream of Taylor Park Reservoir, and really is in part due to mysis shrimp being entrained out of Taylor Park Reservoir and really increasing the size structure downstream of the reservoir. And so often anglers are catching brown trout like this one downstream of the reservoir. And this section of the Taylor is protected by catch and release regulations to ensure that we maintain that large quality trout fishery. Shifting downstream to the Gunnison River, we do have similar estimates of biomass and density. We do sample 2 sites within the gold medal reach on the Gunnison. The Almont reach is just downstream of the town of Almont, and then the Vantagh reach is near Gunnison. And all of our estimates of biomass have exceeded the standard since the late 90s, with the most recent estimates at both sites exceeding the standard by about 3 times. Looking at numbers of quality trout, we have seen estimates exceed the standard since the late 90s, with our most recent estimates about 5 times the gold medal standard. And one thing to point out is that our estimates through the Vantagh reach, which is near the town of Gunnison and shown as blue on these charts, are within that area that we did habitat improvement work on. So we'll continue to assess that, but it did seem that we had a positive response on numbers of quality sized trout after that work was completed. So certainly the Gunnison and Taylor rivers do maintain quality trout fisheries and have for quite some time. This slide shows those waters, which are the right 4 waters on this chart, with all of our other gold medal waters. And so as you can see, they do compare very favorably with our other gold medal waters in the state. As far as numbers of quality trout, they're actually 1st and 5th when compared to all of the gold medal waters. And looking at biomass, ranked 3rd and 6th. So happy to see the Gunnison and Taylor added and acknowledged for their ability to maintain quality trout on these reaches. And with that, I'll just end with a picture here of one of our biologists, Josh and Aaron, fishing on the Gunnison River. I don't know if we have any time for questions or if we'll hold those for later.
And I appreciate it. And I think we got a little bit of time. If you can, John, if you can look online and see if there's anyone here.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat right now, but if folks have those, they can go ahead and put them in the chat. And so with that, open it up to the room. If any folks in attendance here.
On one of the charts, it seemed like in 2016, one of the bars just was missing completely. Is there a reason why? I'm gonna have like a comparison report within that data set.
Did you hear that?
Let me look. It was, if there was a bar missing, it would just be that we didn't sample that reach in that year. So that those charts should have showed all the data that we did have. We don't always have the ability to sample each reach during each year. So it might have been that we had sampled just one reach. I can go back to the presentation if you'd like, though.
If you can look at it, if there's a different answer, Dan, you can jump in here in a bit, but I think that works.
Okay.
Anything else, Dan? All right, we will turn it over. Thanks again, Dan. We'll turn it over to Jamin and terrestrial updates.
Thanks, Corey. Thanks, everybody. I'm Jamin Grigg. I'm the Southwest Region Senior Wildlife Biologist. I guess with the time tonight, I just want to go over a few updates on some of the major projects that we have going on throughout the region. So we have 4 area offices throughout the region: Durango, Gunnison, Montrose, and Monte Vista, San Luis Valley. And in each one of those area offices, we have either 1 or 2 wildlife biologists that are working on various projects, monitoring projects or research efforts or whatever on various different species. So I just wanted to give a few updates on some of the major projects we have going on. Our biologists just completed about 250 hours of helicopter surveys that we do on an annual basis. So every December and January, our biologists and along with area staff, district wildlife managers, fly about 250 hours every winter to collect herd data on all of our ungulate species. So deer, elk, pronghorn, mountain goats, bighorn sheep, moose. Generally we're collecting sex and age ratio data. So for deer, that would be how many bucks per 100 does we have in the population, how many fawns per 100 does we have in the population, to give us an estimate of fawn survival and fawn recruitment, as well as either buck ratios or bull ratios or whatever the case may be per species. So we just completed again about 250 hours of that across the region, and with that data, or with those flight hours, we're able to collect this data for basically every ungulate population or every ungulate herd in the region. And if you can see that slide, it just gives kind of an indication of the data we are collecting. So I just threw a couple of our herds up there. One is the Uncompahgre deer herd population outside of Montrose. The other one is one of our Gunnison Basin deer herds. And you can kind of see how those December fawn ratios fluctuate annually. And all of that data then goes into a population model. So it's kind of interesting to compare from herd to herd. Montrose tends to be a drier area, more arid environment. Fawn survival in that environment is really correlated heavily with summer precipitation, so summer rains that provide summer habitat, whereas Gunnison is much more of a winter regulated system. So it's regulated largely on based on how much snow we get during the winter and how much those animals are stressed during the winter and then the forage that is produced from the winter precipitation that we get there as well. So you can see, for instance, in Gunnison, when we get milder years, we get very high fawn ratios. And then in Montrose, that's really dictated more by summer precipitation. So that just gives some indication of some of that data that we collect and that goes into the models. Go ahead, John. And then we also radio color hundreds of animals across the region every winter to monitor survival rates throughout the winter and on an annual basis. I think across the state, we radio collar well over 1,000 animals annually. This can either be done with a helicopter, either shooting a net over an animal from a helicopter or darting them from a helicopter. Some of this is also done from the ground using live traps from the ground, baiting animals into a live trap. So then we place these radio collars on animals, and we can collect survival data as well as movement and migration data, because most of these collars at this point are GPS radio collars that are providing several locations a day. So we get a variety of different data from those collars. We have 5 deer monitoring areas across the state. 2 of those are in the southwest region, again in Montrose and Gunnison. The ones outside of the region are in the Meeker area, the Middle Park area, and then the Slide area, the Upper Arkansas River Valley. So again, survival rates in Gunnison tend to be heavily correlated with winter conditions. So you can see in 2016, we had a real heavy winter in Gunnison. It really knocked back fawn survival for that year. And then during the mild years, we get much higher fawn survival in Gunnison. And again, Montrose, our survival rates on fawns tends to be much more correlated with summer precipitation, because we just don't get the heavy winters in Montrose that we get in a place like Gunnison. So it's really much more correlated with summer precipitation. So for instance, in 2020, we had a really great summer precipitation year, a lot of good summer rains, and we had really good fawn survival that year all the way through the winter. So just kind of an idea of some of the monitoring that we do on ungulate species. We also starting this year, have started the same monitoring on elk populations across both the region and the state. We now have 3 intensive elk monitoring areas across the state. One of those is Middle Park, one is South Park, and then the Gunnison Basin as well. So every year we're going to be collaring about 80 cows and 60 calves to monitor survival rates and movement and migration on those animals, similar to what we've been doing on deer now for about 25 years. Go ahead, John. Another project we have ongoing is in the Gunnison Basin. Some of you have already heard a little bit about this project, but a couple of years ago, we started a lion density study that we're rotating around the state. So every couple of years, we'll move it to a different study location around the state, so we can collect lion density monitoring and lion population estimates at various sites around the state. And currently, we're in the Gunnison Basin. For the last couple of years, we've been radio collaring mountain lions, both with hounds and then darting and tranquilizing lions out of trees using hounds, and then also baiting them into live traps using road-killed deer. The lion's then sedated and radio collared, and we're able to track that lion. And then we set up a camera grid across the geographic area of about 100 cameras that have a predator call associated with the camera, and that call goes off at night, and it tracks the lion into the call, and then we're able to get the lion on camera. So right now we've got about 25 lions radio collared in the Gunnison Basin, and are in the process of collecting that density estimate for the Gunnison Basin and that lion population estimate. So that's again a project that's moving around the state and is currently ongoing in Gunnison. Go ahead, John. Another one that some of you have heard about is our ongoing elk monitoring study in Game Management Unit 521, which is one of the Grand Mesa game management units. This is kind of up in the Paonia area on the south end of Grand Mesa. So starting a year ago, we began radio calling both bulls and cows in this game management unit to monitor a few different factors, but essentially we're curious in monitoring the movement of these animals, both on and off of public lands. So distribution of these animals on public lands versus private lands, timing of their migration, movement in and out of what we call the DAU, or the data analysis unit, which is kind of the geographic area that we monitor a population on. So we're kind of testing our the geographic boundaries that we have for that population. And then we're curious how these animals are responding to early season hunting pressure. And again, moving on and off public lands on private lands. So we've now got, we've radio collared 39 cows and 31 bulls for this project, and are collecting GPS collar locations on each of those animals. And this will be a multi-year study to evaluate all those different factors. We've also done similar studies to this in the San Juan Basin, down here more in the Durango area, Vista Springs area. We've got a similar study in the Montrose area as well. And I guess those are just a few of the kind of major projects that we have ongoing within the region right now that I wanted to touch on and just give a brief update. Be happy to answer any questions now or if there's any later.
So I'm kind of selfish. Yeah, we live in the southwest corner of Colorado. That's a huge mountain range between Gunnison and here. So what kind of numbers do you have for us? And do you take into consideration the elk that are going into New Mexico and
Right.
and other parts of the state?
Yeah, that's a great question.
You know, just on you as a whole.
Yeah.
And then I'll have a second question about the lions.
Sure. Yeah, you bet. Yeah, so we have we actually do have several years of data. We just completed a cooperative study with the Southern Ute Indian tribe, monitoring elk movements throughout the San Juan Basin. So we do have a similar study that actually we just completed a year or two ago in the San Juan Basin, which would include kind of all of the elk population between Durango and Wolf Creek Pass, essentially. So we have been collecting both deer and elk data on those populations, and have similar data there. We're trying to expand that, I think, west at this point, now that we've completed some monitoring of that population, and are hoping to now kind of continue to expand it west towards Utah.
Do you work in conjunction with New Mexico?
We do, yeah. So at least once a year, we hold an interstate meeting with New Mexico, Utah. The tribal biologists are there to coordinate projects with them as well. And a lot of the deer and elk that spend the summer on our side of the border, throughout GMUs 75, 77, 78, those GMUs, a lot of those animals migrate south, either onto tribal lands or into New Mexico. We see the same thing along the Utah state line as well. So we do hold at least one meeting annually with those different biologists in different states and tribes as well.
Quite a bit of that data is what we use to determine, and this goes back to when I think Matt was the area manager, but that's limiting archery seasons in the Southwest. A lot of this data is what drove that.
We're definitely especially interested to hear about trends, like what hickory is seeing. I mean, that's one of the nice things is we're sharing that info. We're not alone. I mean, we're all seeing consistently the same stuff. We might have seen things sooner than they did or vice versa, but yeah, it's one big system that we're all kind of co-managing. And so that collaboration is definitely super helpful as we manage, like I said, it's a combined resource. So.
Do you ever see like an instance where data would essentially change and open up 74 back to being over county archery again? Or 75?
I mean, I think over time, maybe, I don't know, Jim.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one of the real driving forces behind limiting archery really had to do with hunter crowding. and complaints that we were hearing or feedback that we were getting from hunters related to hunter crowding, as well as animal distribution off of public lands and moving on to private lands early in the hunting season. So I guess we would have to see some reverse in those trends probably before we can go back. But it's certainly something that we monitor and will continue to monitor in the future. And actually, we're going to talk about that a little bit later when we come to the season structure discussion. Some of that will come up as well. But we're certainly always interested in feedback.
Jamin, we had one question come in from online, just asking about what our estimated margin of error is on some of that data from those studies, and are some of the numbers dependent on terrain or other factors. I'm assuming, drought years may be one of those factors.
Sure, good question. So, yeah, with almost all of the data we collect, there is a margin of error, a variance associated with that, kind of a statistical evaluation of precision with all of the data that we collect. That can, say on a survival rate, like if we collect a survival rate on mule deer fawns and Montrose of say 80%, that's probably going to have a variance of say plus or minus 5%. So, or a confidence interval of plus or minus 5%. So, we oftentimes can come within a certain percentage of several percentage points, but if our estimate is 80, it could be 75, it could be 85, and we have those variance estimates, that we're within a certain amount confident that we're 95% confident that the true number falls within 78, 82 or something, even if our estimate is 80. So we do collect those variance estimates for all of our data, and that can vary depending on sample size. For the flight data that we collect, it can be affected by weather conditions, wind conditions when we're flying. Snow cover is a huge determining factor in that. So we do have those estimates for all of that data, but it certainly can vary depending on conditions and sample size.
All right, thanks for that, Jamin. In the interest of sticking close to our agenda, we'll go ahead and move on. And any more questions, I'll keep them in mind as we get to the roundtable portion. But now I'll turn it over to Deputy Region Manager Matt Thorpe for a quick update on the draft wolf plan.
So they gave me the easy one because nobody cares about the wolf plan. I won't talk about the plan itself, just for process and where we're at, kind of the checker. So everybody knows Proposition 114 requires Colorado Parks and Wildlife to release gray wolves with the timeline trying to be by December this year, 2023. We've really, I think, tried to do as much as we can with a really robust process. So we've convened a stakeholder advisory group, which was different kind of stakeholders. So we had pro wolf people, ag people, outfitters, county commissioners, a wide broad thing to represent pretty much, Colorado, the West Slope especially. So they met over the course of 18 months. We also convened a technical working group. So that included wildlife and wolf biologists from across the Western United States that have actual experience with wolves. Then we also have some internal teams that have been working on different stuff. So that kind of culminated with in December is when we presented our draft plan to the Parks and Wildlife Commission. So that was we as a staff trying to take into account all the information that we had received to develop basically kind of a staff recommendation. And then now we're in the process, you guys see the slides, because one of the things also mandated by the proposition is a requirement for robust kind of a public input process. And so we had a series of meetings before we really started in earnest into the process. Now we're having a second set of these coincided with our Parks and Wildlife Commission meetings. So we had meetings in Colorado Springs. We had a well-attended meeting in Gunnison, a very well-attended meeting this last week in Rifle. This week is a virtual meeting. And so that's another opportunity for people from throughout the state or even outside the state, if there's time allowed, to provide their input on the different aspects of the plan. The plan covers such items as the reintroduction of logistics, how we will manage wolves on the ground, a big piece, and that's really kind of where my involvement has come, because as a region, we do the statewide game damage program. Even though it's statewide, it's administered from our Southwest region. I'm part of that. So there's a big piece on conflict minimization and also compensation for livestock owners, because that's one of the parts that's mandated through the statute. And then also a big component is the consideration for lethal management as it's needed to manage wolves that may get into trouble. So those are all things that are on the table, but it's all in draft form. And so that's why we're kind of getting to the end of that public input process. And so that's why the February 22nd meeting, which is an in-person meeting in Denver, that's really where the commission is going to come back to us as staff and say, these are the things we want to see changed. So that's where that process is. Just so everybody knows, so you can, if you wanted to provide a virtual comment to our commission, and I promise you, like, our commissioners really are doing their best to really listen to and read all the comments that come in. So you can send a comment to wolfengagementco.org, or you guys can grab a card. We have some of these up there. If you have a smartphone, probably everybody does, there's like a little QR code, and that takes you as a link to get there to, I think, to provide comments. Also, our website has a ton of info. If you just Google CPW, there's a banner that moves kind of from left to right. It'll show a picture of a wolf. If you tap on that, it'll take you to the draft plan. Be warned, the plan is about 100 pages. It's about 300 pages total because it has the SAG recommendations, technical working group recommendations. It has all that information, but really the moral of the story is that whatever your opinion is, if you have one, now is the time to get it to our commission, because this is going to be the plan that really guides us through these initial phases. It's going to be something that these rules will be set in regulation. So they are subject to change. It's not like everything's in statute or it has to be changed by the legislature, but it is really going to guide us at least through these first couple of phases, I would imagine. So just really want to encourage folks. The commission wants to hear from people. We're especially interested to hear from people on the Western Slope because we're the people who will be most impacted by wolves. We know that they're gonna, they've identified release sites, but we anticipate any place there's good habitat, and that's where wolves are gonna move to. So that's the quick and dirty version of it. But really, that's what we just want to stress, is that the commission really does want to hear from everybody. And so this is that opportunity.
Questions?
Back on track, almost.
What's the source of the wolves? Where's that translocation coming from?
So we're looking at the northern Rocky states, and we've already had some kind of informal conversations, but it hasn't said. It's one of those, we got to make sure we have the plan in place, and then that kind of frees up for these subsequent steps. But that's kind of what we're looking at as our preferred locations.
Matt, one question online from James. Although not explicitly stated in the proposition, does CPW and or the commission have flexibility to delay the target December 2023 release of wolves until the 10J process is finalized? I don't know.
That's really a question I can't answer. That'd be a great question to the commission. And I know they're currently having those discussions right now, but that's where the commission would rely on their attorneys or the AG to determine really what that statute meant and what is their ability to go past that date if need be for any reason.
Thanks, Corey. All right, that's it on that one. If any more questions come in, again, we may have some time during the roundtable Q&A, but we'll switch gears now to Deputy Region Manager Heath Kem with a Keep Colorado Wild Pass update.
Hello all. So I'll give a brief update on the Keep Caught Wild Pass, also called for short KCW Pass. In June of 2021, Governor Polis signed the Keep Caught Wild Pass legislation to effect. So that started back in January of this year. Colorado residents should start seeing the Keep Caught Wild Pass added to their annual vehicle registration at the DMV. You can opt out of this pass at the DMV. You can opt out of it online, through the kiosk, by mail, or through in-person customer service representative at the DMV office. This new pass is $29, which saves more than 60% compared to the traditional annual state parks pass of $80. The KCW pass also funds more than just state parks. This money will be also used in search and rescue funds, the Colorado Avalanche Information Center funds, kayak, and then after a certain amount, wildlife conservation funds and outdoor accessibility and educational opportunities. The goal was $36 million we were hoping this would raise. The first $32.5 million will go to state parks. $2.5 million will go to search and rescue. And the last of that, 36 of $1 million will go to Colorado Avalanche Information Center. Any money raised after that point, 50% goes to the Wildlife Cash Fund and 50% goes to the Parks Cash Fund. You can buy the pass only during the vehicle registration process. So if you don't get it then, you have to wait the next year until your vehicle registration comes around again. If you do opt out, you're not going to be opted automatically back in next year. You're going to have to go actually opt back in. When you buy the pass, the CPW logo will be printed on your registration, and that gives you access to all 42 Colorado state parks. If it's not transferable between vehicles, it is assigned to that vehicle. So we go, make sure you get that pass, you go to state park, make sure you get that registration with you. You can also have it on your My Colorado or My CPW app. We'll have it there also. If you decide not to, that you can opt out, all regularly priced Colorado State Park passes are still available for those who opt out and for non-residents. And prorated refunds are available for people if you have an existing annual pass. Want that Keep Out a Wild Pass, there is a prorated refunds available for people who go that route. There is some, I think a few cards like Matt had over there, a few cards on the table available over there if you want more information on the KCW pass. Do you have any questions?
I got one real quick one. You know, I have to register my truck as well as my trailer. Is that pass required on your trailer also?
No, just be
Okay.
wonderful.
And just a little bit of the history, and I'm swagging the number a little bit, but you know, annual parks pass sales probably been around 16,000 or 16 million a year. We're hoping this generates 32.5 million. I mean, you can go to our parks today, you can tell we're underfunded. It needs a lot of infrastructure upgrades. So, I mean, this isn't a novel or new idea that Colorado's come up with. There's other states, Wyoming and Montana, I know Arkansas has a sales tax. There's other states that use ideas that are almost identical to this one or similar at least in nature. And I mean, it's bad out there if you go to some of our parks. I mean, it's time that, you know, hopefully we get to a point that we can actually proudly fund what we're trying to manage out there. And it's, you know, I'm not trying to say there's other options. It's the best price if you know you're going to go to a park. I mean, you can still get day passes or the annual
The
transferable pass, but just for those up front that know they're going to go, it's a great opportunity, and hopefully we get more people in that pockets that's helping us manage those state parks to the level that I know everyone wants us to. So.
And on top of that, there's money going to search and rescue fund, money going to kayak, information center. So those agencies are also being funded.
Is that a predetermined split on where that revenue stream would go? You
That's in the legislation.
anticipated how much it would generate, what the dollar values were. I'm just wondering the percentage split.
It's in the legislation.
Okay,
Automatically, I think the first 32.5 million goes to CPW.
okay.
And then once it hits above that, there are certain dollar figures that go to those, I mean, whether it's search and rescue or kayak or other programs that potentially fund others. Yes, sir.
I got the new park pass already, but I don't, how are people gonna know if someone has passed? I didn't get nothing to put on the car.
You know, it's on your registration, and what we're hoping is that more get on than not, to be honest. I mean, yeah, we're shooting for a certain percentage more, what we call a break even. But as time goes on, if we need to do more checks, what we're really hoping is that this cuts down a lot of those lines getting into a park. On your registration, there is it will have our emblem on there. So when we're doing checks, we'll just simply, I mean, if we're doing them at the gate, we'll just ask for your registration and it'll have it on there. But you have it.
So it's gonna take the park staff a lot of time to figure out if people have one or not having the park pass, rather.
Hopefully, it's just as simple as it's if we check and you don't have it, then we're selling you a parks pass like we normally would. If you like it, so hopefully it's a more streamlined process, to be honest.
So they're gonna have to check you at the gates and stuff.
There'll probably be spot checks. I won't say that will happen all the time.
And it's just directly on the registration.
They can't be pulled up. So say, like Bear Creek State Park, I used to go there to shoot my bow. I would just drive by because I have a sticker. But are they gonna be coming out and be like, hey, I need to see your pass while you're doing whatever you're doing? Or are they gonna wait at the truck? Can they pull it up at your license plate?
They can. That's one other way that we're trying to get implemented is license plate readers.
Uh-huh.
So I think that's available or being at least tried out at a few parks right now. That will expand to more parks. We've got other parks may or may not have someone at the gate and there'll be a sign that says come on. And then while in the park, we may do spot checks. And then if we get problem areas, I'm sure you'll see more gate attendants, things like that. But as long as we don't see any major problems, we're going to try to stay on the air and change every day.
Would it an alternative be as well, like within your tags, it just has like an extra piece that goes underneath that emblem? So we can just physically see it, yeah.
Like for a price tag.
Yeah.
And that's what we were looking at is I mean, anything that we would do, I mean, even just printing our emblem on the registration cost us something. We looked at multiple other options, whether it's a sticker or whether they read the sticker on the back, and all those come with a price. So we tried to figure one we could deal with, work around, and that's kind of where we're at. Doesn't mean it won't change in the future. It's just where we're at.
So for your search and rescue stuff too, yeah, that's not in place of, getting it with your fishing license or anything like that. That's just additional funding for them.
Yeah, so they're in the negative every year on search and rescue. Just Boulder County alone uses all the search and rescue funds that are generated.
Real.
Yeah, so that's partly why they've started this.
That's an opt-in program at the time of registration?
Not out.
Opt out, okay.
So every registration,
Okay,
every registration is opted in until you physically say.
Gotcha. Okay.
This is going on right now too, though. That's correct. Okay.
We need to educate people of Water County that, because the first time I thought it was automatic, I discovered I didn't have it. I had to get another one, and all they had was a sign. I thought it was opt-out, but it's their administration is that way.
We'll check on that. We've heard a couple other problems with other counties, but very few, to be honest.
Your question, if you have my Auto app, you can link your registration there. Just do that on your phone. Same with my CPW.
Washington State did something similar many years ago, and you saw a massive increase in revenue stream opt-out scenario. Many states have considered opting out, but they generate, there's a great difference. Rather than obviously.
You're 100% correct. That's why we chose opt out, because of some of the other states that had an opt.
Yeah.
Yeah, what they were seeing was considerably lower.
Yeah.
So my,
Yeah.
opt-in and switch to
Good with online?
Yeah, let's go ahead and try to get back rolling here. I know a lot of folks, especially online, as we're getting more and more people signing up, are ready to hear about our big game season structure and licensing. So I believe Jamin, and then we've got Gunnison Area Wildlife Manager Brandon Diamond joining us virtually as well. I think they're going to lead us through a presentation on this, and then we'll take some more questions on this. So let me go and fire up the PowerPoint here, and I'll turn it over to Jamin.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so we just, as John just said, we wanted to give just a brief update on our big game season structure process and license allocation process. There's some revisions or review that are currently ongoing, and we wanted to give an update on that. As John said, Brandon Diamond, who is our area wildlife manager in Gunnison, is on with us virtually. And then myself and then Matt Thorpe are all on our internal CPW working group related to big game season structure and license distribution. So they can help me out with this, and Brandon and Matt just jump in anytime if you have anything to add or anything that I missed. But we're just going to give a brief update on this. So we have a couple of kind of parallel processes going on right now. One is our license distribution or license allocation system that we're currently reviewing. The Parks and Wildlife Commission has asked us as staff to review our current system and our current process. So essentially what we're talking about here with license allocation and distribution is how we allocate licenses, hunting licenses between residents and non-residents, as well as our preference point system that is required for high demand hunts that aren't an over-the-counter hunt or more of a limited hunt. So that's essentially what we're talking about here. In November, the Parks and Wildlife Commission approved updating the 3-year average that's used to determine our high demand 80/20 hunt codes. So essentially how this works is any hunt code that requires 6 or more preference points goes into an 80/20 resident, non-resident allocation split. So 80% of those licenses go to residents, 20% go to non-residents. And then for any hunt codes requiring less than 6 preference points, it's a 65-35 resident, non-resident split. So 65% of licenses in that situation go to residents, and 35 go to non-residents. In the past, that's been set on a 3-year average that was about 15 years old, as far as how many points were required per hunt code. So the commission in November approved a recommendation from us to update that to basically a 3-year rolling average. So from here moving forward, there'll be it'll just be a 3-year rolling average of how many points are required for each hunt code. And if it's 6 or more points, it will go into that 80/20 resident, non-resident allocation split. And if it's less than 6 points, it'll fall within that 65-35 resident, non-resident allocation. So that will begin in the 2023 hunting season. We're now finishing up some public outreach and asking for input on some different alternatives related to license allocation. The commission is continuing to examine a few different alternatives. One is the possibility of going to a straight 75-25 resident, non-resident allocation split for all hunt codes. So rather than having an 80-20 allocation for high preference point hunt codes and a 65-35 allocation for lower preference point hunt codes, this would just be a straight 75-25 resident, non-resident split for all hunt codes across the board. Another alternative, potential alternative that the commission is examining and asking for public input on is an alternative that would leave the lower preference point hunt codes, the lower demand hunt codes at 65-35 split, but then those high preference point hunt codes requiring 6 or more preference points would move from an 80-20 license allocation to a 90-10 resident, non-resident allocation. So 90% would be allocated to residents and 10% would be allocated to non-residents. So that's another alternative that's being considered. There's a couple of considerations and alternatives being discussed related to preference points. The commission is looking at potentially a system called preference point banking that we've used once in the past. I think they're re-examining this alternative. Essentially, the way preference point banking works is that if you had, say, 10 preference points that you've accumulated and you wanted to put in for a 5 preference point hunt code, currently the way our system works, if you put into that 5 preference point hunt code, you would lose all of your preference points. So you would have to use all 10 preference points to draw that hunt. With banking, you would be able to put in for that 5 preference point hunt code, lose those 5 preference points, probably with a 1 or 2 point penalty as well. But then you would be able to keep your remaining points rather than losing them. So that's one alternative that's being considered. Another is called group averaging. So if I have 3 preference points and Matt has 15 preference points, and we decide we want to hunt together, our preference points would be added together and averaged, and we could put in for together for a hunt that takes, say, 7 preference points or whatever.
Single tag.
We would each get a license. So if I've got 3 and Matt's got 10, between the 2 of us, we would have 13 points. That would give us the ability for each of us to put in for, say, a 6 preference point hunt codes, and we would each get a license. So basically, your points are averaged amongst the group of people. So that's another alternative that's being considered. We encourage everybody who's interested to provide comment on this. If you go to our engagecpw.org website, you can provide your comments and fill out a little survey and questionnaire. Provide your comments related to these different alternatives that are being considered. We'd love to hear from you and get your input on that. Again, related to those allocation alternatives, license allocation alternatives, those resident, non-resident splits, as well as these different preference point alternatives that are being considered. Obviously, the status quo is also being considered related to these alternatives as well. So you can give your input on those. Brandon or Matt, you want to add related to license allocation before we move to begin season structure?
No, you got it, Jamin. There's a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know if we want to try to answer those before we move on real quick.
It's on allocation. Let's do it before we go to season structure.
One of them, someone asked if the 80-20 allocation split has been in place already or if it's something new. And I tried to throw the answer to that one in there. The 80-20 allocation for those 6 or more preference point hunt codes has been in place, I believe, since the mid to late 2000s. So it's not new. That is something we've been operating under for a little while now. And the next question asks about point banking and the penalty for participating, and asking if we had a penalty last time we banked or if this is new. And correct me if I'm wrong, everybody in the room here, but I believe we had at least a 1 preference point penalty the last year that we tried banking. So that model of having a penalty is not necessarily new. And probably would continue if our commission decides to maintain banking, or try it again, I should say.
Roger has his hand raised, so I'm gonna see if his mic's working and if Roger can chime in here. Looks like Roger's mic's still not working. Roger, if you wanna type it in too, I can relay it.
Any questions here?
On the averaging aspect, so if you go into that average pool, do you lose all your preference points after, like say you both got that unit, essentially, how does the penalty work along those lines? Or not even just penalty, but like losing your preference points after that. So I have two.
Yeah, sure, right. I think, yeah, that's a good question. I think some of that is to be determined by the commission yet. But at least the way the system, the way our system is currently set up, if we were only to switch to an averaging system without other modifications, you would lose all of your, you would both lose all of your preference points once you averaged them and got your licenses.
Is there staff recommendation to the commission on any of these proposals, or is it just?
Not yet. There will be a staff recommendation related to all of these proposals. And our internal working groups will be a part of that. I think on the front end here, we'd like to go through the public process and collect as much public input from folks like you as much as we can before we.
That might influence staff recommendations.
Right,
as well.
Exactly. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. The public process and public input that we gather will certainly go towards forming our staff recommendation, and then that will be provided to the commission. But that'll be a further step in the process. So I think on the front end here, we'd like to collect as much public input as we can related to these alternatives.
And when are those decisions made by the commission?
Brandon, can you help me with that, or Corey? I believe.
I think we're still a couple of years out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Has there been any discussion on license fees? I mean, me as an in-state resident, I don't pay daily squat compared to an out-of-state resident. So if we lose those out-of-state resident revenues, are they going to increase our fees?
It's legislative.
Okay.
It's certainly been discussed, but yeah, go ahead.
About the only leeway we have is within those caps that are built into into our statutes. So we can always go down, but there's always a cap up top that we can't go above without legislative approval. So right now, I believe we're at a cap, and there's CPI attached to that every single year, and the commission doesn't approve that on whether we apply CPI. And we give them a hard year. There's times that the commission will sit there and go, yeah, this, we'll catch back up there.
Questions?
There's certainly been discussion about whether hunters would be willing to accept higher license fees in cases where alternatives are selected that are going to decrease CPW revenue. So that would all be part of the process. But like Corey said, that would have to be legislated. But there's certain discussions about whether that's a trade-off that hunters would be willing to pay if alternatives are selected to increase revenue.
What kind of trends are you seeing in license sales?
The trends have been very similar over the years. I'll say there's no science behind it, but the reason we have the 65-35 is for a reason. When you run the numbers, we typically have about 65% residents and 35% non-residents applying in our draw. The majority of, and I hate to call it complaints, but the angst around our licensing system is those licenses that take 6 or more points to draw, which if you look at the data on that, is less than 10% of the licenses that we give out. So most of the regulations that we're going to be passing
really is based on the smallest number, but the highest sought after licenses.
I don't know if this is connected to it, but are there gonna be any changes to over-the-counter licenses health-wise next year?
We'll get it.
Or is that a
Good segue.
Yeah.
Perfect segue. Yeah, so we can dive right into that because that's where we're headed here. So the second part of the second process ongoing within this is our big game season structure process. Within our population management, herd management, there's several different components of that. One is our herd management plans that are updated every 10 years that guide management for each individual herd. Then on an annual basis, we set license numbers, give license number recommendations. A lot of the data that we collect related to the helicopter surveys, the radio calling and survival rates and all of that is included within our population modeling and population estimation, and then the license recommendations that we provide annually. And then all of this is tied in with our big game season structure. And big game season structure is a 5-year process that basically guides how we structure the hunting seasons, the dates and lengths and times of our hunting seasons, everything from archery, muzzleloader, rifle seasons, and how those are structured on a 5-year basis. So we're currently beginning the process for the next big game season structure, which will begin in 2025. It'll be the 2025 through 2029 big game season structure. And so that's the season structure that we're currently collecting input on and holding various meetings for related to that. Go ahead, John.
And actually, this helps address your question a little bit on timing. You said that was 25 through 29. So the commission will see that probably in November of 20. It's typically a 3-step process, 2 or 3-step process. And we have to have those numbers to implement for the next license year by typically May, because that's when we're running the draws. Okay. So that's kind of the very tail end where they'll see what regulations have come with this BGSS process.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, the big game season structure is a 5-year framework that establishes basically the what, when, where, and how we structure our hunting seasons and the timing of all of that and yeah, basically our whole hunting framework for a 5-year period. Go ahead, John. So on to some of the discussion topics that we're currently considering related to the big game season structure, and some of the larger topics that the commission has shown interest in and that we're hearing from the public. One of the big discussion items is certainly related to the early seasons and the dates and lengths of the early seasons for deer and elk. So especially the archery hunting seasons, limitations related to archery, any changes related to over the counter. As I mentioned, we have several ongoing projects evaluating how animals are responding to early season hunting pressure, and one of the places where we have seen an increase in, to the question that came up earlier, one of the places we have seen an increase in hunter participation has been, especially in the over-the-counter archery seasons, which is why we've limited some herds across the state for the archery seasons, is because we were seeing an increase there for those over-the-counter archery seasons. They're just very popular and more so all the time, it seems like. So that's one discussion topic. Go ahead, John. Also, a number of topics related to the rifle seasons that are currently up for discussion or that we're hearing a lot about, and would encourage folks to provide comment on the rifle season structures and the dates and lengths of our regular as well as our late rifle seasons for deer and elk. There's been discussion about the possibility of adding deer licenses to the first rifle season, or at least having an option where deer licenses could be added to the first rifle season. So our first rifle season is currently elk only. And there's certainly at least some interest in having at least the option of adding deer licenses, at least in certain areas for that first rifle season. There's been discussion and interest related to creating a second rifle pronghorn season. So we currently only have one rifle season for pronghorn, whereas we have several for deer and elk. Especially on the eastern half of the state, there seems to be a lot of interest in maybe having a second rifle season for pronghorn. Again, the over-the-counter issue, which has come up here as well. This is something we hear about all the time. Folks who are either in favor of over-the-counter hunting or would like to see limitations related to over-the-counter hunting, either for archery or for rifle. So there's certainly discussions related to whether we should continue over-the-counter hunting or go fully limited for elk, similar to what we've done for deer in the past. And that could be a total limitation. It could be a limitation only on non-residents, whereas residents are still maintain over-the-counter hunting access. So there's a couple different variations there, and we'd like to hear your input on any of that. Go ahead, John. There's discussion about making slight changes to our weighted points system that we employ for bighorn sheep, mountain goats, and moose. This is mostly an administrative change. It wouldn't really impact the way the draw works for the average hunter very much. But our current weighted point system is just a little bit of a difficult system to articulate and to communicate to folks. And so we're discussing switching from a weighted point system to a bonus point system. Functionally, it would work the same way. A bonus point system is essentially just your name's in the hat one more time every year that you apply. So it's a name in the hat type of a system. The weighted point system that we currently employ is similar to that. It functions in the exact same way. It's just a little more complicated. So this would just maybe make it a little more easier for folks to comprehend and understand. And then there's also discussion of adding what we call a multiplier to your weighted points or bonus points if you apply for bighorn, sheep, mountain goats, or moose. Essentially, there's so many people in the system at this point, so many people applying for these licenses that even if you have a lot of weighted points or bonus points, you still may never draw one of these coveted licenses simply because there's so many people in the system. So the more years you put in, it increases your odds every year, but it still doesn't mean you're ever necessarily going to draw. There's been discussion about adding a multiplier so that it would almost, the more of a multiplier you had, or the higher level of multiplier you had, it would move it almost more towards a regular preference point system where the more bonus points you have, the more likely you really are to actually draw a license.
Just to give you an idea, there's certain hunt codes, actually there's quite a few hunt codes that if we were, especially with sheep and moose, that if we were to stop allowing folks to apply for it would, and we just went with who had the most, it would take over 100 years to get through some of those hunt codes. So we often hear, we'll just do away with it. Apparently I have no extra choice having these bonus points. Just do away with that, go off who has the most. That's why we don't do that, why we've had to go to this more lottery style.
So there's discussion about whether or not a multiplier would be added to your weighted points and how much of a multiplier that would be, or if we're just going to continue with the current system. I think we're running a little behind on time, so I'm just going to try to cut this short and just move to the end here. Go ahead, John. Bottom line is we want to hear from all of you and really encourage you to give your input, whether it's related to license allocation, preference points, or the big game season structure, please go to the engagecpw.org website and provide comments. As Matt mentioned, really similar to the Wolf Plan, the commission does take these comments seriously. We staff take your comments seriously. All of these get read, they get compiled, summarized, and it's something we all see, and it really does influence whether it's the staff recommendation that goes to the commission or just the opinion of individual commissioners. It really makes a difference. So please go there. There's a lot of information on that website that'll help clarify probably some questions and provide comments.
So one of the questions I saw online was it deals with archery and muzzleloader running concurrently together, and with the fatality that we had last year. And to be honest, one fatality is too many. But I can say that we did debate that internally in our agency. The commission debated that publicly. And this was through talking with both archery hunters and muzzleloader hunters. And the commission chose not to change that structure and keep those together. That doesn't mean that it won't come up again during BGSS. Potentially, that's one of them that I think it almost comes up about every time. It's finding the how that works for everyone that we haven't got to yet. So, and I have to throw it out there that hunting is still one of or the most safest things to do in the woods these days. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Corey. And another online question, is there any thought to applying a preference to someone who is age 65 or older and holds at least 15 preference points for species, allowing them a chance to use those points before they can't due to health reasons?
It's a great question, and yes, it has been brought up multiple times. I'm sure that one as well will be debated through this process. We currently, right now, just have the youth preference, so that's something that could be added in if the commission chose to do so. But that's the first time I heard that the 15 points are over. But it's another good idea.
Just want to relay a comment made by our other caucus rep, Roger Cesario, here as well. He says, if the commission adopts changes to allocation, with this being on the March commission meeting agenda, I would hope they would keep the option open to adjust during the big game season structure process, as allocation, preference points, season dates, over-the-counter tags, etc., are all interrelated and one can affect the other.
Good point. Yes, sir.
The question for Kevin to me, I think it was 19, 20 points on it. I did draw it 2 years ago. I'm 74, and it wasn't easy. But I have a problem that somebody stays on that and applies every year, and then someone goes over the top of you. That concerns me. I never complained or anything. I did get the news. Got a nice one. But the point I'm trying to make is I'm well over 65. I would still be applying for the next day. And I can't walk very far. I can shoot and find me crippled. But I understand why the person wants it, because once you've invested lots of money, particularly since you've increased that $50 or $100 charge, you've invested a lot of money in there. And I'm old enough to understand what the man's desire is, but I still think we started the game this way. We should continue the game until all 100 years worth of hunters are gone. And a lot of my friends who have been training with moose have passed away, or like myself. So be careful when you ask for all these changes, because they have a ripple effect to the whole system. It'll be very, very damaging. I probably won't even apply this year for any hunts. And I have elk and deer on my private property.
Yeah, appreciate that.
And the second thing I want to mention is this, just like I did say, people should be watching this bill about the county being able to prohibit firearms being discharged on private land. They had a hearing today, and if I hadn't known about this, I would have been at the loser. They had a hearing, it's the second hearing. They're going to pass this. Where these apply a county which, well, 4 or 5 years ago, we were doing planning, tried to limit this to 3 firearms in a household. This commission may have different bodies, but their minds are not that different. But you should be thinking about that. That's going to affect the game and fish a great deal, because I guarantee you, no one will ever step foot on our properties again. Most of ours in Mexico.
It'll affect us as hunter ed instructors too, where we can go teach hunter education and stuff like that also.
I mean, I've got a card for being an instructor in Mexico and Colorado.
And the bill he's talking about is 1165 if you want to get one. And it does, I think with current amendments, it allows a county to prohibit the discharge of firearms if there's 35 or more houses per square mile.
I mean, that you guys probably have to stay out for obvious reasons.
We commented on that. We commented on that.
Because I'm very concerned it's going to go ahead and go through. I do not under any circumstance trust the county commission.
What was CPW's comment on that?
Ours mainly revolved around hunting, and that we did not want it to affect the ability for us to manage wildlife in the state.
Would that limit private landowner tags and stuff? Yeah. I mean, if you can't use a rifle or anything and you're in an area where that's affected by it.
I'm guessing if you had 160 acres, you either would have a housing development right next to you that would preclude you. Or,
which that's, I mean, there's tons of places like that around here.
I mean, I would have to look into that to see if it would. I mean, that's a completely separate issue of where, I mean, if you don't have the ability to hunt, would you be eligible for LPP is what you're asking.
Yeah.
I don't have that exact answer right now.
Do you know what the percentage split is between residents and non-residents for purchasing OTC tags for archery?
Not right here in front of me, but it's pretty easy to assess.
It's roughly 50-50. Non-resident percentage has been increasing over time. So it used to be a higher percentage of residents relative to non-residents, and that is even down over time as non-resident participation has increased. We're now up close to about a 50-50 split statewide.
You guys talking about a cap or anything on that, or I know it's a lot of revenue missed, but
it's certainly one of the
moving away with the entire OTC, you know, because I think that put a lot of people off on it.
Yeah, that's one of the alternatives being considered is maintaining over the counter, but having a cap. So an over the counter with cap. Yeah, that's certainly one of the alternatives, along with the total limitation or limiting non-residents, maintaining OTC for residents. Those are all alternatives that are being discussed and be good comments to provide. But yeah, OTC with caps is certainly in the discussion.
I'd like to go back to my black question I didn't get asked, and this one may go to Adrian or Corey. What do you guys notice is the difference between having the quota unit increased as one giant unit? And do you find that the Pagosa guys are filling the quota faster? You know, because I know those Pagosa quotas would be some of the first few that filled up during the year, and some of these that were maxed out with a lot of private land never filled. So do you guys find that you get more of an even split, or?
I think we only have 2 years worth of data, right? So last year, the quotas didn't fill, but this year did. So, and I think by design, you know, we fully expect more harvest to the east, you know, so that's the kind of sink, if you will. And time will tell, right? I mean, we're 2 years into it. So just by nature of the landscape here, you know, a lot of land held in private ownership, a lot of public lands inaccessible. So there just hasn't been, you know, traditionally the harvest over here. So this year it did fill. that might have been a factor of conditions as well, but it seemed like last year there was good conditions too. So we're 2 years in, so something to keep looking at, so.
Couple points on that is when we changed to the West Slope mode, we, I'll say, agreed that we would be for 3 years and be able to gather some of the data that we promised. And that's some of the studies that Jane was doing to determine whether the models that we use to determine how many lines we would take is correct. So we're running some of that. And then my second point would be there's at least 2 other areas in the Southwest we're looking at that once the Gunnison study it is over, that we would rotate to. Okay. I think one of them here in Durango and the other would be that one.
How long has the Gunnison one been going on?
So when it rotates to each site, it's there for 2 years. So we did 2 years in Middle Park. Well, excuse me, let's go 3 years. 1 year on the front end just to capture lions and radio color lions, and then 2 years of camera grid where you're collecting that density estimate. So we're in year 3 out of 3 in Middle Park, and year 2 out of 3 in Gunnison. And then next year it will rotate to a unit in the northwest part of the state. And then the year after that, it'll rotate back to the southwest, which will either be like the San Juan Basin here around Durango and Padosa, or the Uncompahgre Plateau out of Montrose.
You guys just run those studies on individual units, you're doing like a county, how does that work?
It's on a geographic, it's a geographic area that the geographic area that lion population is managed off of. So usually it's a grouping of GMUs.
Okay, so it'd be like 74, 75 for here.
Exactly. Yeah, it might be 75, 77, 78. You know, probably a grouping of either 4 or 5 GMUs, kind of geographic area.
All right, I hate to cut in, but we've got this room for only 7 more minutes. So we have one more item of business we need to attend to. Roger, I think your mic's working if you want to give it a shot real quick.
Can you hear me?
We got you, Roger.
Wow, that's embarrassing. I was on strike too. So most everything I had on my list was covered on the agenda. And I'll make this quick. I think well-deserved on the Gunnison and Taylor for gold medal, been a commercial permit holder for a long time on those rivers, and that's well-deserved. And like I said, most everything else was included. Jamin, I'm gonna reach out to you in the next couple of days on the big game season structure. I've got some things that I want to run by you being on that working group.
Sounds good, Roger. Yeah, you can reach out to myself or Brandon or Matt.
Sounds good. Oh, and one other thing, I did have one more thing is, there was talk about stuff in the legislature, the corner crossing bill, House Bill 23-1066, committee hearing February 27th at 1:30. That's an interesting bill. I don't know. I have no idea what the chances are. That would be huge to open up tons of public land to hunters in this state if it was able to pass.
Another one to pay attention to. I'll throw it out for a question if you have it, and then I'll try to do my closing.
General question.
Yes, sir.
Wolf, has the staff in the plan made any decision about a hunting season once the population reaches its desired level?
So no, it is mentioned as potential, they call it phase 4. It's just identified as it's something that's been discussed through all the public meetings. Some people were pro, some people are against it. Basically, what's proposed in the plan is just that it's something that should be considered only after we've reached those thresholds. So there's no recommendation one way or the other. It's just put in there as like, this is something for a future commission to decide if and when we recover the population.
Future commission to decide, not the legislature.
Right.
So far.
Future somebody.
So the somebody could be relatively important in this state.
Anything else? Anything online?
We just gotta go with our formal reelection process for Mia and Roger is wanting to do another term as our caucus reps for the Southwest region.
Okay, so I'm going to touch on one other thing, or a couple things real quick, but just in closing, if you as the public would like to hear on general topics, the best two folks to reach out to is either Mia or Roger, and they really try to get the temperature of the region, and then they push topics to us for us to put on an agenda and talk to you about. So it gives us a little bit of time to do our homework on things, so that we're answering the questions appropriately. With that being said, and I can't say it enough, Roger and Mia has been great as far as your Southwest region caucuses. This probably isn't the easiest way to do it. I mean, really voting, because there's online as well. I'll just say this. Roger and Mia are eligible for a second term. So I can leave it at that. And you can either email myself or John Livingston if you would like something to change or stay the same. We'll take that vote, that pulse. And then at the next meeting, I mean, I'll reach out to Roger and Mia before that, but at the next meeting, we'll just let you know, or if there's another name thrown out, then we will have a formal vote, something like that. So, yeah, if that works for everyone.
Next meeting should be in July, typically before the next statewide roundtable meeting is held. So probably late July, look for a news release from us to go out about when our next region caucus meeting will be. If folks want to grab, there's goat and sheep brochures back there. There's turkey season brochures back there. A few other good resources for hunters. There's some calendars back there. Feel free to take them to help me lighten the load on the way back out to my truck after this. The big game season brochure should be out at your Durango area office by Wednesday. If folks want to stop by and pick up a big game brochure, they can come to the region office or the area office closest to them. Same for the folks online. If you're at any of our other Southwest region area offices, you can pick up the big game brochure there. Obviously, it's available online at the CPW website as well. Just all the latest and best info on the season of hunting.
And the last thing I have is thank you. Thanks for attending both in person and online. And if you need anything, reach out to us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Thanks for being here.